A skyscraper in Moscow was hit by a drone attack for the second time in around 48 hours, while a doctor was killed in Ukraine.
France begins to evacuate hundreds of European citizens from Niger as tensions rise following last week's military coup.
Poland remembers the Warsaw Uprising, an act of rebellion against the Nazis that killed at least 180,000 people. Workers in Moscow's financial district are looking at the sky with increasing concern. For the second time in 3 days, a drone allegedly launched by Ukraine has hit the same skyscraper, sowing bewilderment in the neighborhood. There were no victims.
Ну, неожиданно, что второй раз, примерно в то же место. Мы не ожидали, конечно. Теперь уже совсем не хочется приходить.
Безопасность, я даже не знаю, как это комментировать, потому что мы живем вот в соседней башне, вот она, башня Ока. Мы видим с окна, как сюда подъезжает ночью полиция, скорая и так далее. Это очень страшно, потому что просыпаешься ночью под взрывы.
According to the Kremlin, 2 other drones were shot down by air defense in the Moscow region. Meanwhile, one of Russia's military heads visited the country's troops in Zaporizhia, a region that is home to Europe's largest nuclear power plant, and where 2 people were killed just last week in a strike on an apartment building. And in Kherson, a doctor was killed when a Moscow bomb hit a health center. A nurse who was injured in the attack is in critical condition. The shelling is taking place against the backdrop of the Ukrainian counteroffensive against Russian troops. Further north in Kharkiv, Russian forces targeted a vocational school with Iranian-made drones.
France has begun flying hundreds of European citizens out of Niger's capital, Niamey, as tensions rise following last week's military coup. Paris has set up a crisis centre to organise the evacuations amid a deteriorating security situation on the ground. Separately, Brussels has backed the ECOWAS group of African nations' sanctions against the rebel regime.
Nous avons clairement affirmé notre soutien à toutes les mesures adoptées par la CEDEAO lors de son sommet du 31 juillet en réponse aux coups de force. Mais jusqu'à présent, nous n'avons reçu aucune demande de la CEDEAO. Donc si toutefois nous recevions une demande, nous l'examinerions dans le but de définir la meilleure façon de respecter les engagements politiques que nous avons pris.
As the French cabinet met to discuss the crisis, Mali and Burkina Faso declared their support for the coup and issued a stark warning against any African or European intervention.
Les gouvernements de transition du Burkina Faso et du Mali avertissent que toute intervention militaire contre le Niger s'assimilerait à une déclaration de guerre contre le Burkina Faso et le Mali.
Chad's president has met his ousted Nigerian counterpart Mohamed Bazoum, now under house arrest, in a mediation effort. But so far there seems little prospect of a negotiated settlement. A military coup in Niger last week has raised fears that the West African nation, a key Western ally in the fight against jihadist groups in the region, could pivot towards Russia. The ousting of democratically elected President Mohamed Bazoum has been widely condemned by the European Union, the US and from within Africa. Jean-Hervé Jezekel at the International Crisis Group says while Niger is central to Western security efforts in the region, it's too early to say if it might turn to Russia or the Wagner Group.
We know that Wagner is interested in, developing its capacity, in West Africa. We anticipate also that within the new military regime, if they were to stay in power, they will look for different allies, and they might be tempted to establish closer relationship with Russia. It's a possibility that there is a change in alliance, and that Russia might develop its capacities through Wagner in the region. But right now, it's also a red flag that is very convenient to use in order to be in a stronger position when you negotiate.
There are also concerns about the coup's potential impact on the import of uranium to power Europe's nuclear plants. As the world's 7th largest producer of the chemical element, it supplies the EU with almost 25% of its reserves, and France about 10%. But Jezekel says the impact is not critical.
France used to be much more dependent on Nigerian uranium in the past than it is today. There have been, a diversification of access to uranium in the world, including Canada, including also Kazakhstan. So it's a different market than it was 20 or 30 years ago. So it's still an important interest, but it's not central. It's not vital to France as it used to be.
And he says it's far from clear yet whether the military will stay in power.
And there is still a possibility for the President Bazoum to come back. It will be extremely difficult. This is not the most likely scenario, but this is still the scenario on which many actors are working on. There are many actors in the international community. And as a matter of fact, even Russia is encouraging, is pushing for the return of the elected president. But if this external pressure does not connect with, an internal pressure, I'm afraid it won't work.
Clashes have erupted in Senegal after opposition leader Ousmane Sonko was charged with insurrection and his party dissolved. Authorities also restricted internet services to counteract what the government called hateful and subversive messages. Sonko is a candidate in next year's presidential election and a fierce critic of the incumbent Macky Sall. His popularity is rising, particularly among the youth, and he's seen as a threat to the ruling party. He has already been convicted in absentia on moral corruption charges. Last month, Macky Sall announced he wouldn't be running for a third term, but is expected to throw his weight behind a candidate from his party. The political turmoil has rocked a country long considered a bastion of democracy in Western Africa.
Europe is on fire. Approximately 2,600 hectares of land have been decimated across the EU, and the UN warns there will be more aggressive fires in the decades to come. 37.7% of the EU's land area is covered by forests. Many of them contain highly flammable trees. So what is Europe doing to prevent the continent from burning to the ground? The European Commission says it will buy a fleet of Canadair jets to boost Europe's firefighting capacity. But these planes will not be ready until 2027.
We can't keep just throwing money at the problem. We need to assume that our communities will burn at a certain point. So we need to take, short-term technical measures to protect the, infrastructure. We need to fireproof our fields, our homes, our structures.
We have to adapt to this new reality. And this is true not only for the countries in Southern Europe, where we have this problem, and it is already quite bad, and it's getting worse, but also to countries in Central and Northern Europe, where the problem of wildfires is emerging, and they have to be prepared, not only to fight them, but to prevent them.
And preventative measures are exactly what the European Forest Institute and Fire U Risk are working on.
We know that in Europe most fires are caused by human action, but some are also natural. So we are looking at the previous history of casualty of fires in the different parts, and we are also looking how we can reduce these man-made fires.
Fire U Risk has surveyed every square kilometre of Europe to make civilians and governing bodies aware of the risks and the types of vegetation most likely to burn. Fast-growing weeds, grasses, eucalyptus and pine trees all promote the spread of wildfires. For now, fuel breaks and buffer zones can help them from spiralling out of control, but replanting and stepping away from flammable monocultures would be effective in the long term.
Since we can't change topography and since we can't change weather, what we can do is we can change the vegetation, and that means we can change the structure, the type, and the arrangement. What we eventually want to achieve is that when a fire does burn, it is not as severe.
Team USA scraped through to the last 16 of the Women's World Cup following a disappointing goalless draw against Portugal on Tuesday. The defending champions were nearly dumped out of the competition when Anna Kepeta hit the post in the dying minutes of the game. The result sees Megan Rapinoe's teammates finish second in Group E, just behind the Netherlands after they hammered Vietnam 7-0. Elsewhere, England outclassed China 6-1 to book their place in the knockout phase and top Group D. Lauren James produced a stunning performance to score a brace, while Russo, Hemp, Kelly and Daly also found the back of the net. Denmark beat Haiti to finish in second place, just behind England, who will take on Nigeria on Monday.
Sirens and military parades through Warsaw mark the 79th anniversary of the city's uprising against the Nazis during World War II. Across the Polish capital, cars and public transport stopped for a minute to honor victims of the Warsaw Uprising. A 2-month rebellion by the Polish underground resistance that left some 180,000 people dead and a city completely destroyed. The Polish president told crowds it was a struggle that involved the entire city, not just fighters, and the act must never be forgotten. At least 18,000 insurgents were killed and another 25,000 were wounded after fighting erupted on August 1, 1944. The Polish capital fell to the Soviet army 1 year later.